Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Off the Top. I am your host, Anthony Bonet, and joining me is a very, very special guest, the main man, Mark Rottensteiner.
Thank you. Yes, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm doing great. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing well. It's a great Wednesday. It's a good morning. I'm excited.
Oh yeah, it's really. When I say very, very special guest, I mean very special guest. I mean we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I mean this is probably, no disrespect to any of the other great guests that we've had on, but this is the one I've been really looking forward to. I mean ever since the idea was pitched, I was like, we have to have Mark on, and thankfully we got you in just at the last second there.
Yeah.
We had like one space open, and I was getting Alex, the assistant producer, like, yo, we got to get Mark on right now, and so, but it all worked out.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for inviting me. I'm excited. I'm really, really excited.
Of course, yeah. So tell the audience a little bit about what you do, because you have a very broad range of responsibilities here at the agency. So try your best to kind of explain who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's Nimbus to say the least, that's for sure. My name is Mark Rottensteiner. I'm the accounts director at the agency, which we are a strategic communications firm, which I think you've said on a few podcasts previously. But in that, we're a fully commercial firm within the University of Florida. So we run it as an immersive experience. Our students are coming in this to learn to get a great resume and great portfolio before they graduate. In that role, though, my job is to not only train the students, but also to keep the work at a commercial grade level, industry standards. So I'm here pushing the students or pulling the students back, depending on what we're working on in different work streams. And then I also run the business side of it. So as accounts director, my job is to run all day-to-day operations and client services. So our students are client facing, and they're working with the clients directly. I'm there at every step of the way, every email, every client meeting, to make sure that the relationship is really garnering the best outcomes, and also that they're getting the best relationship from both sides. Our clients are getting amazing relationships and amazing work, and our students are also getting amazing experience for their resumes and for their portfolios before they graduate.
So how did you get to getting into this role? Were you a UF alumni before, or what was your kind of path leading up to coming to working here?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it was extremely random and also unexpected. I did not expect to take on this role, and I didn't plan it. I also didn't expect to be in Gainesville, to be honest. So I did graduated from here in 2018 as for PR, with a PR degree. And then from there, I decided to go into lobbying specifically. So I went to DC for a little bit, and DC and Tampa, I was going back and forth with a lobbying company there. At the time, it was first as an internship, and then it came into a kind of contracted role in a sense, where I was working with different clients, and I was working with different accounts to manage those expectations, manage those client services, and to manage the larger goals. We did a lot of guerrilla marketing, if you will, boots on the ground, a lot of like community outreach, to try to create the larger perceptions around our topics, or around what our larger goals were to achieve within specific congressional hearings, or specific even local municipalities, thinking about some large topics that were happening in Tampa, specifically around roadways, different changes that were happening across at the time, there was a ton of infrastructure conversation happening in Tampa. So a lot of that was talking with local business owners, talking with local communities to try to create more momentum and get people excited to even at least be interested in transportation.
Big task,
literally, in roadways of all things. So it was a really great experience, and I did a lot of work actually with a lot of international clients as well. We had a lot of international companies, but also international countries as well that were clients of the firm as a larger scope. So I did a little bit of work on small projects here and there, and I was excited about it. I think it was great. I think what I realized, though, was just lobbying isn't really what I want to do long term. That wasn't really my career path. And so at the time, it was kind of funny. I was reaching the dean previously, so Dean McFarland, who has recently retired. She reached out and said, here's a position that might be open if you're interested. We're looking to kind of revitalize the entire program. We're looking to make this into something much bigger and better. And I was excited. So that's kind of how the position itself came to be. At that point, I was onboarded, and then we decided to take on our new consulting executive director, who's currently with us, Laurent Berman, who has an amazing experience in the industry, over 30 years, and has been executives for huge, very well-known agencies. He's led massive accounts like P&G, and Coca-Cola, Microsoft. So he's ran global campaigns, global client services, with very large teams underneath him, and very large objectives, and has been successful his entire career. And then we have Nalia Saray, who also came on board, who specifically focuses on student engagement here. But before that, she was also a very large part of Hispanic marketing and Latinx marketing in Miami for an agency down in Miami, and then led the work for McDonald's and for Dalton Dental and Target. So it was a really great team that we decided to kind of bring together, and it just kind of happenstance worked out. And now I think it's great. We're a really close team. We're close knit. I think the agency has become really a whole new, it's grown on itself. It's grown to a whole new life than what we ever expected, which is great and exciting literally every day. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I can't speak much to what the agency may have been like beforehand, because I've only been here since October of 2021, so approaching the year when this episode comes out. And I didn't even come to UF until 2020 was when I started. I'm but a small lad in the grand scheme of things. But in looking at like in our past YouTube videos, for example, like kind of the archives that live on the internet of the past agency life, it does seem like the kind of culture has kind of changed a little bit. And so how much do you think that has to do with the ELT team, which if you guys don't know at home stands for Executive Leadership Team? How much do you think has to do with that? How much do you think has to do with the students, just a different generation of students that we have here? What has led to this kind of evolution?
Yeah, I think we as an ELT team decided to really allow the culture to take a form of its own, where I think that was our new mission coming in, thinking about how do we, of course, support that process, but we don't necessarily have to lead that process. We want to help the team figure out what the culture looks like as a larger picture, and then we help cultivate that and help bring that to life. Where and that's I think what's really been successful recently especially with our culture changes that have really occurred over the past 3 years or 4 years. Previously, I think it was more focused on the work, and it's more focused on the business, which I think is great, but it lost the purpose of what we're trying to do within our student immersion experience. We wanted to create the best experience for our students and create the best work that they could take out into the industry, whether it's experience, resume, or portfolio work. And I think changing that mindset to focus more so on empowering the students to take on that role and take on the culture, to take on what they want to, allow them to take on the culture, allow them to take on the agency that they want to work in and that they want to lead. And then having the ELT support that, if you will, was much more effective. And that's where I think our culture is thriving right now because of that. So we focus more so on the people here, and we're focusing more so on the experience, which is the core goal of the entire experience from day one. That was the mission for when the agency first got started. That's already, I think, led to a really great success in terms of we do significant amount of analysis across the year. We do at least two climate surveys. We're constantly checking to see how the experience is going as a whole. And because of that, we're seeing metrics that are coming across the board, and we're seeing a massive increase in both excitement of the agency itself and of the experience, but also of the learning objectives. What are people really trying to achieve, or what are the students really getting out of this experience by the time they graduate?
Well, I can tell you from the student perspective, I've felt that kind of environment of allowing creativity to go forward, to take place. Because specifically through this experience, this podcast project that I was blessed to be able to take on with another past member of ELT, Olivia Salzman, who now works for Analog Folk, and just kind of allowed me to run with it and go, are you motivated to want to take this on? Sure, take it on. Show us what we got. And it's great. Maybe biased, but smart move, very smart move, because it allows for, when you walk into the office, when you're just walking by the office, you can see that it's like a treehouse that's been taken over by the inmates are running the asylum.
Literally, I love it. That's a really great way to describe it. Literally, it's so true. And you're completely right, though. I think that's the best part about it, is that we always try to strive for experimenting with everything. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things I think I would love to, and we still have a lot to grow in for sure. I'm still looking to make more achievements and make more make more optimizations, if you will, or make it better over and over again. I think one of the things that I'm really hoping that we can bring into the picture, hopefully pretty soon, is an R&D type team, research and development type team, where we're experimenting with new technology, we're experimenting with new types of marketing or new types of advertising that are coming out, and seeing what that means for the future. So thinking about AI, thinking about the metaverse, thinking about different forms of storytelling as a whole. What does that mean for the industry, and how can we start to experiment with that now to see what our opinions of it are, and does that make sense for us to think about that in the future with our clients and also just in general and for the industry as a whole. I think the exciting part is this team literally is going out in the industry and leading the industry. I mean, many of our graduates are going into amazing roles, amazing positions. Many of them are getting beyond entry-level roles. It's significant. They're jumping 2 or 3 spots, if you will, or 3 rings, if you will. And so they're going into even mid-management at the time of graduation, which is amazing to see. So that's, I think, where we're seeing that this is actually, the agency itself is experimenting with the future of Marcom and thinking about what does that look like. That's exciting.
Marcom. I love those the combination words.
Yeah.
The compound words. Marcom. I love it. I don't think haven't heard that one too much.
Yeah.
Awesome. So one of the evolutions that I've seen over the years with the agency is that it used to be very focused on being the millennial agency. The firm that had its finger on the millennial pulse, the pulse of the millennial generation. Now our messaging is a lot focused towards Generation Z, the Gen Z pulse. So how gradual or not gradual was that shift in messaging, and what do you think? Well, obviously, the different students coming in, younger students, different generation coming in. What was leading that change in messaging?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we realized that there was a large shift happening within, not to your point even about the culture itself, but also in the way that both our team works in general between the millennial staff and the Gen Z staff. And it was gradual for sure. It didn't happen overnight. It happened over probably 4 years, give or take, I would say. When the agency started, we were at the tail end of what most statisticians will say is millennial in terms of years of being born, etc. So as we were at that tail end, and then moving into the Gen Z side, we started to see some changes and shifting in behavior, not only how the team worked with each other, but also thinking about even communications and marketing as a whole for our clients. A lot of you could easily see differences in how millennial audiences or millennial team members would think about approaching a problem or approaching a solution, and a Gen Z team member. And so that gradual shift started to really occur. At that point, we realized, it's time to start to think about going beyond just millennials, start to think about truly the next generation. Our next generation is now in our office. They're part of our team. We need to start thinking about what does that look like and how are they leading the now industry as a whole. The interesting thing is a lot of our work actually isn't just generational. So although we do quite a bit of marketing and we do quite a bit of messaging around, we are a Gen Z firm. Naturally, we know it best because our team is Gen Z, and who knows it best than their own generation. But I think beyond that, we do a significant amount of work. Almost really 80% of our clients and 80% of our work streams are general market. So we're talking about really any generation. We're talking about different age groups. We're talking about anything from really 18 to up to 65 or 70. We've even worked with some retirement homes. So whoa. I mean, it's been a very large difference in terms of age groups. I think that's been helpful though to see the different trends that are happening across Gen Z. How are Gen Z consumers differ from previous generations? And it is a massive gap. It's a massive way of thinking that is very different from how previous generations either interacted with brands or even interacted with each other. It's with the tech industry and with changes that are happening daily with our lives as a whole. It's a completely new experience, I think, moving forward for everyone in the world.
So you touched on something there with how Generation Z interacts differently with brands ever before, and the kind of term that kind of goes with that idea is digital native.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be digitally native?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting for Gen Z, where in the past, I think digital native just meant you understood how technology worked and you understood how to put it in your life. I think for Gen Z, that means very different than it did for previous generations. I think for us, digital native is that literally our entire lives are supported and run through digital. We're run through technology around us every single day. every moment of our lives. I think a lot of times that is also, we see a lot of headlines where Gen Z is categorized as being naive or being fickle, if you will, in terms of pricing, but also fickle, which isn't really a correct word, but fickle around how technology works, and being very moving constantly into different technology, or moving constantly into different areas, being judgmental of technology as a whole. I think that's slightly wrong. It's slightly correct, but slightly wrong. I think it's overgeneralization. So you'll see massive headlines from some of the best, from the largest marketing publications around the world that are highly respected. The data is all correct, and the data that they're bringing into it, but I think the perception of how they're looking at the data is very different, and not quite the reality of it. And that's what we talk about with a lot of our clients. All of the data is, there's so much data out there that a lot of these companies, a lot of agencies across the world, they're looking at the same data set. They're not necessarily, a lot of it's the same things. You're looking at a very small subset of technology tools, or larger modes to think about what does that larger subset look like. But I think beyond that, you have to really have a Gen Z focus and filter to really understand what Gen Z means, how they're perceiving technology as a whole. I think for us, digital native means that, when we like to say, in a perfect example, I'll have one conversation with you on TikTok, and then the next second I'll have it with you on text message, and then it'll go to YouTube, and then it will go to like YouTube comments, or it'll go to Instagram DMs, and it feels natural because we are on all those platforms already, that jumping to all those different platforms doesn't feel wrong. It feels the conversation can continue, or the relationship or the connections can continue in really a full circle 360 around everything that we're touching around the time that we're working and socializing and living together as a whole throughout society. I think the interesting part, though, to that is that even though that's natural, there are still subcultures. There are still social norms per channel for when we're talking about social, or even just talking about different touch points. So whether it's email versus social versus traditional advertising on commercials, or thinking about like just word of mouth, etc. All of those different channels still have very specific social norms. And I think what we're seeing is that, although it's even natural for Gen Z to go through those different forms of channels within a matter of seconds and communicate with each other, the same people within a matter of seconds, that doesn't necessarily mean that brands or agencies can do the same. You still have to abide by the social norms. It's different for one consumer who is doing this just to be social versus a brand or business who's doing this for commercial reasons and doing this to create relationships with stakeholders and with their consumers. So there is a disconnect with, I think, how marketers understand what Gen Z means when we are digital natives. I think it's a massive disconnect, and that we're really focusing on now. We did a significant amount of work with Microsoft around this, on what does it mean to be digital native for Gen Z, and how does that change the future of what Microsoft is doing in terms of communications, in terms of marketing, etc. So yeah, I think, long story short and very ramble, but I think the big thing here is that Gen Z, digital native for us means that we are constantly touching every part of our technology. I think we're also looking every moment of how we can bring technology into our lives to make it more efficient, to make it easier. But that also means that we're changing constantly. We're not necessarily loyal to one way or one method for what we're working in. So whether it's a project management tool or just social in general, we're always looking for the next thing, not because it's hype or because it's because reality, or because the industry is talking about it and it's a buzz, but more because it could be better. It could be even better than what we currently have, or it could bring us into a whole new area we've never experienced before, we've never thought of. So I think it's the digital native side. I think we're always exploring new ways and new technologies constantly.
Yeah, we've talked about social media in various forms on this podcast before, and one of the ones that we talked about was like in our Be Real topic, we talked about the app Be Real, which you've heard of it. I've seen you posting about it in the Slack. And one of the things that we talked about in our Be Real topic in a previous episode of this podcast was how there's different verticals in which people use social media, and that, at least for me, impacts how I view the impact that social media has. There's the business vertical, the business side of it, and then there's the personal side of it. And that episode, we talked a lot about the social side of it, and how really social media, I think there's a lot of consternation with use of social media because it's pitched to us as being purely social, authentic, and whatnot, but so much of it is like the streams get crossed a lot with the business and the social, where so many people, like influencers that people follow, there's influencers are so big because there's a chance for a more personal connection than there is with Jake from State Farm, who you just see on the TV and you can't really talk to him.
Yep.
But at the same time, the influencers are also business people, and their posts are just as much a product as it is a connection. So there's the I want to look as perfect as Kylie Jenner does, but Kylie Jenner looks like that because she is modeling these clothes that were given to her by a brand that she has a brand deal with. Yeah. So it is interesting now that you bring up, that brands have still a way to go to figure out how to communicate with people and how to follow the social norms that exist between the different social medias. Because if a brand were to come to me on Be Real, then I would be extremely put off by that. That is, say in the future, if advertising is allowed on Be Real, which speculation, it might be. Yeah. They got to make money somehow, right? Yeah. So if I ever get an ad on my Be Real homepage, then I'm going to be extremely upset, probably more upset than I would be on Instagram, because on Instagram at this point it's okay. Well, that's how it is. Yeah. But Be Real is supposed to be marketed as something different,
right?
So how do is there a way for brands to kind of work to work that balance, right? How would if you're pitching to a brand that's going to be advertising on Be Real for the first time, how would you suggest that a brand work in that minefield of different expectations?
Absolutely. I think the big change, or the conversation we always have with these, especially with larger brands, but even smaller brands too, is changing your mindset from thinking about consumers coming to you as a brand and trying to find ways that you want them to come to you, and more so, how can you come to consumers, and also making sure you're going to them naturally into the right avenues as well. So Behance is a perfect, not Behance, sorry, I'm thinking about Adobe Behance. Be Real is a perfect example, because you're completely right. I think it feels very unnatural for a brand to be there. It's meant to be one-on-one connections. It's meant to be with a larger group. So when a brand is starting to enter that area, it feels inauthentic, and also feels like they are encroaching on what society is kind of determined. This is not for you. This is not, you should not be allowed here. I think that's where brands start to lose their understanding of what their purpose is and what they're trying to achieve. Their goal, and a brand should never feel like they need to be everywhere and anywhere. Your goal should not be on every channel. You should not be on every single touch point with a consumer. You need to really hyper focus on what makes sense for your individual consumer, with not only your consumer base, but also those that you're trying to attract that maybe haven't heard of you for the first time, or that have just maybe sort of heard you, but they don't really know what your brand does, or don't really necessarily know what your company does, etc. There's some very fine lines of how do you start to bring them, how do you go to them in a natural and in a way that they want to see you. And that a lot of times takes research and strategy, which unfortunately a lot of brands, a lot of companies and agencies don't do, because of time, because of resources, because of budget, etc. And it's unfortunate, but it can lead to some really large, devastating problems and area, like issues that could arise. I mean, a lot of the like crazy ads you see, whether it's on TV or even thinking about brands doing stuff on social, and a lot of times you'll hear all the time, like, I cannot believe they did that. Who would even approve that? Who would think that that's okay? And a lot of times it's because they didn't do the research or the strategy. They just ran for something very quickly, or because there was a quick media buy that they had to get out. There was a contract that they already had in place. They need to put something in just immediately, and they didn't think about it, and they just ran with it. And it's because they're not thinking strategically about it. They're not necessarily taking a step back and thinking, is this really the right moment for our brand, or does this really make sense for us? And I think that's the big shift. That mindset is extremely important, and that's something that we talk about with really every single client we work with. That in order, especially for Gen Z, you have to completely change your mindset from what previous generations were okay with. You have to think about Gen Z is unfortunately very judgmental, and it's not necessarily unfortunate. It's actually, I think it's actually a good thing, but we are much more judgmental than previous generations, and there's a lot of research to back that up and a lot of data to back it up. judgmental in the sense of not only in different tech tools, like for example, Gen Z, when it comes to UX UI or like user experience and different designs, Gen Z will immediately trash or like stop using a tech tool, or it doesn't even have to be tech in general, just a website. It could be anything. If it's not intuitive, if it doesn't make sense, or if it's just not easy to use, Gen Z does not have time to figure it out. They don't care. They'll move on to another competitor. They'll move on to whatever. They'll even find a way to work around it to specifically not have to deal with that. Because to your point, Gen Z is digital native, so we know what the process looks like. We know that there is always a workaround, always. So there's a way that you can get around it that you don't necessarily have to use that app or that platform. There's been really interesting, but I think it's so kind of going off on tangent too, but I think that's also really been interesting for the entertainment industry. HBO specifically and Hulu have gotten a ton of flack recently, and Disney have gotten a ton of flack recently for just user experience on their entertainment platforms. And because of that, so Netflix really started the game with this naturally and has been the gold standard from really day one in terms of user experience. So just simply the design of when you first log into Netflix, whether it's on your TV or your computer, Netflix has always kind of owned that. The user experience has been fantastic from what consumers are saying online, from data points and research that's been conducted externally from Netflix, and even what Netflix posts themselves and publish. But you'll start to see that Netflix is always and continue to be the gold standard for all design, especially if they're making changes throughout the year and changes every year. HBO, Disney, and Hulu have kind of fallen back on that in terms of design itself. And so there's actually a ton of social content, and I had to run it. I haven't run it for a few months now, but I thought it was really interesting. I saw in a few articles a few months ago where it was an industry article talking about the issues with the design on HBO and Disney specifically. And I was interested, so I did a whole social listening kind of report on it and found millions of mentions, hugely negative sentiment around each of these platforms. It's just not intuitive. It's not helpful. And then of course it's getting compared to Netflix every day. So a lot of consumers just, they don't like it. I think that's a perfect example where Gen Z, although they will go around if they can. They will try to find other avenues to go down for their needs or for what they're trying to achieve. Entertainment's one of those things where it's hard. It's either you want to watch that show or don't, and whether it's the user experience is terrible, then you kind of have to figure out whether you care enough about the show to watch it, or if you're just gonna get through it and try to figure it out, or you're gonna move on to a different show altogether and not watch it. So entertainment's that weird kind of bubble that everything kind of is a paradox, if you will, or and completely different from the rest of society. But I think that's the interesting thing for Gen Z itself, is that digital native, constantly changing, judgmental, and it will within a matter of seconds kind of determine this isn't good. Good, I'm moving on.
Oh, yeah. If something doesn't have dark mode, then
Right.
I am immediately starting out on the negative side. Like, you don't have dark. How does something not have dark mode?
Right.
Or I think the only thing that I think software that I use that I'm fine with not having dark mode is Docs software,
Yeah.
Microsoft Word and Google Docs. But I have extensions on my browser. Actually, I have an extension on my Google Chrome browser that makes Docs dark mode.
Wow. Nice.
So whenever I'm feeling like it, I just turn it on, and it messes up every other website. But it does Google Docs on dark mode, and then I can finally it's usable. I can use it. So it really is important. Like and I can tell you from my experience as I run a club on UF called the Game Developers Association, and we run mainly out of Discord.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of conversations between the officers about how best to design the Discord, like the funnel of our new members, where we want like the most information to be found, how many clicks it'll take somebody to fill out a survey, because the more clicks the more time somebody has to click, that's like you're funneling people out, you're filtering people out as few clicks as possible. And I mean, what do you think that's where do you think that sort of expectation comes from? Is that something that's inherent to the generation, or is that something that we've been taught? It's the nurture versus nature conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great. Yeah, it's especially a really, really great question. I think it does come more from nurture than nature. I think where, especially thinking about Gen Z as a whole, at the tail end of millennial, but specifically Gen Z, grew up with technology. And I think what's also interesting is that this new generation has literally grew up with tech. So the day one of being born had technology next to them. Gen Z, to some extent, yes, the older Gen Z has not technically. So it's I think really around 2 or 3 years old is really when they had technology truly immersed around them. If I remember correctly on the correct years, with like how statisticians, it's all, everyone disagrees on when Gen Z ends and which one's the next generation starts.
It's like 18 years, 25 years.
Exactly. It's like a whole thing.
I was born 2001, so I don't know what the hell I am.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. And I'm the same way. I'm like right at the tail end of millennial, right into at the beginning of Gen Z, but so it's like this weird middle round.
What year were you born?
94.
94. Okay. So
Yeah,
getting around there.
Yeah. So some say like 96 is the end date. Some say it's really like 90. So it's like this weird kind of nimbus area as well. But I think the interesting part is with Gen Z now, focus like the fact that especially the younger Gen Z, so those that are coming in that are not necessarily in college yet, but are about to be, or just entered college for the first time, they really did have technology completely around them because they did have that. They had instant gratification to some extent, which I think in a lot of times you see in news articles, instant gratification is perceived as a negative thing. It's perceived as a problem to solve for. I think instant gratification doesn't necessarily have to be, though. I think especially with, again, to this point about Gen Z is always trying to find the best solution. They're trying to find what is going to make their lives better and easier. So the instant gratification part is that technology has always been there as a solution. Technology will create the solution for you. That's been the mindset from really day one as they were kids, with experimenting with different technology, phones, tablets, iPads, blah, blah, blah. So they've always seen technology as a solution or as a path to the solution itself. Mm-hmm. Instant gratification is just simply, I think, especially for Gen Z, is starting to see that means that technology should be the solution. And if it's not the solution, then there's something wrong with that process. There's a gap, whether it's in the technology itself or that the technology doesn't exist, and Gen Z is going to create that technology. They're going to bring that into the market for the first time. So it's going to be even more important, I think, for not only tech in general, but also just how we interact with each other. It has to be seamless moving forward. And if it's not, then you're going to be stuck. You're going to be behind. You're going to get kind of lost in the larger scheme of things, and you'll become outdated within a matter of seconds.
The curve of seamlessness in integration has been exponential.
Yeah.
Over the course of this century alone.
Yeah.
22 years in the 21st century, and you think about the kind of things that we had in 2000, and then 2010 to 2020. I mean, even from 20 to 22, it's growing so much. By 2030, Generation Z will be much older. Generation Alpha, which is the upcoming one, the sequel started
back at the beginning of the alphabet.
going back in time already. It will be probably like in their tens, right? Like starting at like preteens, exactly. And then we'll be talking about even the next generation after that.
Exactly.
Where do you see brands and technology going by that time, by 2030?
That's a great question. I think about that a lot, actually, because I think it's just so interesting and exciting to see what the future looks like, especially for not only our industry but just society as a whole. I think it's this whole concept of the metaverse super, super interesting to me. I think it's because I think the concept of it, one, I think it's being pushed really hard for, of course, like by Meta now, Facebook now Meta. They're pushing it because they're having a huge issue with every business that they own, really, and they're trying to figure out how do they position themselves for the future, how they start to create more market share, and how do they get out their current market, because they're not achieving their goals in their current market. So they're looking for a whole new market to enter and be the first kind of competitor in that space itself. So that's why they're pushing Meta so hard. I think some companies are jumping on that bandwagon. I think it's interesting to see, though, if it actually takes off. I think if it does take off, it will take a completely different form than what Meta now it's like whole metaverse versus Meta. Like, what does that mean? Like, who are you talking about? It's really frustrating.
I get so annoyed by that,
which is again a terrible move by Facebook now Meta to make their name Meta, because it's a whole thing. Metaverse is like a common industry term, so the fact that you're trying to own that as a brand creates a whole round of issues for everybody.
They're trying to be like Kleenex,
literally.
But like inserting, like they're trying to be Kleenex without the brand equity
Right.
to back it up.
Exactly. And Kleenex became Kleenex because of society doing it for them.
Yeah.
Facebook's trying to force it, or Meta's now trying to force it. It's so frustrating. And it's a funny thing, though, so it's like perfectly describes the problem with how consumers perceive, or like what people have problems with Facebook and Meta, is that they are forceful in everything that they do, and none of it's like really, they just do everything the wrong way. It's just a perfect example of that.
I think that's a byproduct of Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg
Yes.
coming from the man himself. The kind of, if you hear stories about like the early days of Facebook and and then startup culture as well.
Yeah.
There's a famous story about when Google Plus came out. Zuckerberg gathered all the people, all the employees at the in the main lobby of their offices, and he gave like this rousing speech, quoting a Roman senator, we will destroy them and we will be out on top. I don't remember the exact thing. And he declared like 7-day work week, and everybody's just working around the clock to try to destroy Google Plus. And it worked. Google Plus is, who even remembers Google Plus anymore?
Right.
Unless you're a nerd.
Right.
So yeah, I'm sure he was probably in that meeting. There was probably a meeting, and he had his quest on. We're going to be the metaverse.
Yes.
The meta is us.
I could see it too. I could see him with like the full hat and the full like get up, ready, excited to go, yelling at everybody, "Why are you not excited to do this?" Yeah. He's a whole, I think you're completely right. I think a lot of the issues from that company stem from him. He's still leading the charge. He's still the visionary for the company itself. And I think he's from what I see, he's a very difficult person to work with. And that's just, granted, I don't know him. I never met him, never really want to meet him. But based on what you see online, yeah, I think he looks like he's difficult and doesn't see reality, doesn't see the future, where it's going.
I don't know. Is that something that's common to founders like him? Because Steve Jobs, for example, was also notoriously difficult to work with. So is that, that's also something interesting to think about as well. Like, what would Steve Jobs make of the metaverse? What would Apple be doing with? Because I think it's safe to say that Apple lost some sort of its inventionary, is that a word? Visionary kind of a edge when he passed away. So seeing like an iPhone for a metaverse, the iPhone of metaverse, of blockchain technology. Do you think? What do you think? Is Apple? Do you think Apple is missing out on some things right now? Because they're kind of moving slow with things like this.
Yeah, I think they're being really strategic, though. I think they're letting other companies like Facebook and many other companies to experiment with that and fail. And then Apple's going to come in to probably perfect it, most likely. The interesting thing is Apple, yes, has moved very fast in the past, but they usually move really fast on things that they already know or things that they're really good at. And then they just start optimizing and changing or evolving their current tech to make it even better as soon as they are comfortable in that space. When it comes to new spaces, though, they typically tend to be a little bit more reserved. If you think about the iPad, for example, they were the first to market, but they were also R&D and testing that for a very long time before that even came to market itself, before they even announced it to consumers. I think they do. I'm sure they're testing it. I would imagine they definitely are, in terms of metaverse, in terms of like what does that mean for blockchain moving forward in the future. But it seems that Apple's very strategic on how they move forward. They're not going. From what I understand, or from what I've seen from as an outsider, they are very strategic on how they want to move forward. They don't want to necessarily jump into a space that they don't feel comfortable in, and then feel like they lose ground with a bunch of their consumers or with their target demographic base. The Apple demographic or the Apple consumer is very, very hardcore. Like they're loyal. They are true loyal customers and true loyal consumers. And so it's interesting to see that. I think because of that, Apple's also said, how can we make sure we don't mess with that customer base? How do we make sure that we don't create extra hurdles or extra issues for that customer base? I think it is going to be interesting to see what the future is. I think as a whole, I think the metaverse it's a weird concept for data, for privacy, for just entering in the space itself. I think it's also interesting and weird because and it will get easier, of course, with time and as technology evolves, but it's really expensive to join the metaverse, not only for brands, but also for consumers. You have to buy all this equipment. You have to create all these accounts. You have to have it's a first world thing. This is not like it's very, for those that are not in the upper income, it's like no one's going to go out there and pay $600-$700 for, like, I don't have the money to spend that. Like, that's just, one, I don't really care, but two, like, I don't have the money. Like, I can't just go around spending money on some weird frivolous technology and to experiment with it. That's not where consumers are today. I think that's going to be interesting to see. It has to be cheaper, has to be easier for consumers if you want to become mainstream, or if you want to become like social, for example, where it becomes part of everyday life.
So we throw around this term metaverse a lot, but in your estimation, what specifically does metaverse mean? Because I think that metaverse is just an amalgamation, like it's just a term to round up things that have been around already for decades. I mean, we have things like World of Warcraft that came out in the early 2000s, this digital environment where people came to collaborate and communicate. Relationships were built on there. It had its own currency. It was its own world, and this was back when internet wasn't high speed. This was before high definition television. But now brands and business people are like, it's like they're finally catching up. Like, we got to put our own spin on this and make it. So what do you think? What's your take on what the metaverse is?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out too. Still, I'm constantly trying to figure out what does that mean specifically. And I also think, to that point too, companies are using it in very different forms. To your point, it is a catch-all where people are saying metaverse just as a buzzword, and then they have a completely different meaning of what they're trying to say that their company is doing or what they're looking for. I think my first mind still goes to augmented reality. From what I understand, or for what I've seen in reports and articles, etc. For when most companies are talking about metaverse, I think they are talking about augmented reality, thinking about how do consumers or how do everyday publics interact with their brand or interact with a fully immersive virtual reality that they can participate in and that they can craft on their own, next to other individuals, other consumers, but also with brands directly as well. So I think when I see it, on my mind always goes to augmented reality first, and thinking about a completely digital world, so our physical world versus a digital world itself, and it mirrors from each other. So I think like you were saying, I think all these different, like especially gaming options, those are true, but I think they have their own worlds. It's a world that doesn't exist physically. I think for metaverse, I think it has to be, from what I understand or from what I'm reading, that specifically is correlated to things that already exist physically, that it could also be adapted into virtual as well.
Are you talking about, just to be clear, augmented reality or virtual reality?
Yeah, it's I think augmented reality.
So that's the digital overlay on physical world.
Exactly.
Like Pokemon Go.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Yeah. I think that's what, from all the articles I've read, and for all like the things I typically see from how companies are talking and brands are talking about metaverse, they are, from what I'm guessing at, talking mostly about augmented reality. There are a few times where I'm even like, I don't know what do you mean by metaverse? What are you trying to say that you're going to enter the metaverse space and that you're exploring that and you're testing it, or your research and development team is working on it? But yeah, from what I see, I think augmented reality seems to be where a lot of these companies are talking. That's what they mean when they're talking about metaverse. Yeah,
I often hear, the metaverse, like people talking about the metaverse, which kind of has no meaning because everybody's talking about different things. And then you also hear multiple metaverses, like Wendy's has its own metaverse. All different companies have their own metaverses that you can connect to, and they're just siloed off from other metaverses. I think the principal technology that's going on, like you correlated with augmented reality, I correlated with virtual reality.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think I feel like it's going. I would hope that it sticks closer to that kind of Google Lens future rather than the Ready Player One future, where people are just in these headsets all the time and nobody has no concept of the outside world. I think it's a lot more palatable, at least. Okay, like we're still connected to the physical world. Physical stuff still has still has meaning, but now there's just, we have heads up display
right.
on ourselves,
Right.
Which brings me to like the kind of like the whole Neuralink conversation, where it's like on the Joe Rogan Experience, Elon Musk said you'll be able to talk without speaking, like you'll be able to communicate without speaking words. Are you are you an adopter of Neuralink when that comes out? Early adopter, later adopter, adopter at all?
I will probably be, if not so either a not adopter at all or definitely a later adopter for sure. I do not want anything in my brain, nothing attached to my body. I'm good on that one. I would rather risk being an old person in the corner that has no idea what's going on than I don't know, I don't think I could do it. How about you though? Would you put it? Would you do it?
I don't know if I'd get the. I would be a very late adopter. Like I'd probably like I would. If we'll compare to like the iPhone generations, like I'll probably get it at around the iPhone X.
Yeah, exactly.
maybe I don't know. It's a difficult conversation when you're talking about. Just putting wires in your brain, and they're starting off with the tests that they will be starting off with are people who are paralyzed, paraplegic. Trying to fit fix the connections between the brain and their legs, or the brain and their arms, or with mental illness and things like mental disabilities and things like that. Yeah. Hopefully all consensual.
Hopefully.
And then it'll move on to like more general consumers. But I don't know if I'd adopt it, and maybe you wouldn't adopt it.
I think so.
I don't know how many. Angel, great videographer. Would you ever get the Neuralink? Yes or no? No, Angel is not putting wires in her brain. But I feel like we might be in the minority though. I think there's a lot of people who would jump on board to something like this, because continuing that conversation of increasing generations wanting more seamless technology. We go from, I feel like the natural progression is going from really fast, high refresh rate UI to something where it's just you think about it.
Right.
You just think about it and it happens. As soon as you think about Squid Game, then it comes up. You don't even have to do anything. Just get up from your couch, move anything, move a muscle.
Exactly. Yeah, it is crazy. I think that that Black Mirror concept, like the TV show, it is crazy to think. So I think it also did so well because it did hit on things that are actually really interesting to think about, and some of the things that they have, even some of the episodes, you start to see it now in like articles, and thinking about like metaverse, and thinking about how companies are trying to talk about what they are trying to explore, what they're trying to do. My first thought was like, oh my god, there was literally a Black Mirror episode on that specific topic, and you're still. I think that's also part of the issue with, I think it's still with brands, especially for some like C-suite, where they expect customers to come to them, and they're not going to customers. It's if you are smart, you should be watching Black Mirror and then specifically thinking as a brand, how do I not look like I just did the exact same thing that Black Mirror was making fun of, or not even making fun of, but like warning of. And a lot of brands will specifically, it looks like they haven't even watched the episode ever, and they're communicating exactly what Black Mirror used, or what like a example brand, like a fake brand that they put in Black Mirror. I've seen some articles where I'm like, that literally was the same key message that a brand had in Black Mirror, and yet somehow there's some disconnect between the CMO or even whoever's the spokesperson. They just think that it's completely natural and it's okay, and it's like you're not doing any research. Again, no research, no strategy. You're just running with something, and it's risky. It's a risky move.
That's where a really good young Gen Z / millennial researcher would come in real handy, because there's so much in this conversation. A great place to look at would be cyberpunk, corporatist, future sci-fi.
Yes.
Things like Blade Runner, things like Black Mirror, things like just all these, so many different forms of media that exist that kind of outline what these things are, and I mean oftentimes they come true, so think back to like something like Star Trek, right? I mean, we're doing a lot of the things that the people on Star Trek were doing, things people contemporaries at the time watching that show. I would never be able to do this, but now we're getting phone calls on our wrists and doing a lot of those things. It's so funny when a corporation, a brand, just accidentally acts like the evil corporation of a TV show, of a movie. That's, I mean, hey, I mean, if it goes back to the fundamentals of advertising and marketing.
Right.
Do your research.
Right.
Do your research.
Right.
It's drilled into all of us in all my classes. Research is the most important. Research is the most important. Planning is the place where you should spend most of your budget, most of your time.
Yes.
But it's just that just doesn't happen. You touched on before that because they're trying to be so quick, trying to be so fast to market. What is that? Is that a self-fulfilling prophecy that they have to be so quick to market and therefore everybody rushes things and things aren't completely thought out, or is that? I mean, how do you amend that?
I think that's a great question. I think a lot of brands naturally, if you're the first in that market or even that sub market, your market share is going to increase, and it will stay that way for a very long period of time, unless you either make a mistake or there's another product that can do better and more and bigger things than your current product. So I think a lot of companies, especially, I think the other issue too is you have a lot of marketing analysts that are saying, oh, go down this route, but you need to do it within 6 months. And so the whole company will then shift and think about just the end goal, which is go to market and launch, but they don't think about the actual product itself, or they don't think about what the purpose is for consumers. Why should consumers care, and why should this be? What is this truly going to solve? What is this going to be part of the larger schema? I think that's where especially if you're thinking about how these decisions are made internally, it's a lot of times starting with a marketing analyst with a concept that they have, or marketing analyst has found a specific area within the business or product that is either exponential growth, or they see this as we need to put out to pasture a previous product, like our current product, or start to what is the word? Yeah, like put out to pasture, or to kind of honestly kill off one of their current products. It happens actually a lot where companies just realize it's just not profitable or it doesn't make sense. And then an analyst or someone will start to see, okay, here's an area we can go down and explore even further, because it is so financial, of course, driven, which makes sense and it should be. But because it is so financially driven, then a lot of the marketing decisions, a lot of the communications, even product development becomes to be put on the back burner. That becomes a secondary goal or objective, and everything's about money, money, money. We need to be the first one there, even if it's terrible. We're the first one there, and people will recognize our brand. But I think it's two very different goals. Brand affinity and being the first to market and keeping market share because of brand affinity is a very different concept than just having a product that's live and hoping that it will kind of create its own brand affinity on its own without much oversight or without much hand holding or cultivation from the brand in general. That's where I think you see major differences in both a traditional marketing sense and a traditional advertising, PR, or communication sense. That's where you see the large disconnect with two very different teams under, yes, the marketing umbrella as a whole, but they're thinking about objectives and they're thinking about goals completely differently. And I think that's the part that we strive here at UF, but strive at the agency to mend. And that's one of the most important things that we think we focus on now as we're educating and as we're helping the next generation of professionals going into the industry. You need to see the bigger picture as a whole. You need to understand that it's not one or the other. It has to be both. Both analysts need to be in that conversation, and advertisers and public relations experts, and the whole communications team as a whole making those decisions together, because you need to look at the larger picture. I think that's where Apple does really well, is that they do. Again, this is from an outsider perspective. I have no idea how it works internally, technically, but I've read a few articles, or I've heard some things from friends that have worked there, that they do a good job about bringing in individual team members across the board to think about what does the future look like, especially for R&D or future product development. They are thinking about the larger picture. They are thinking about all the different touch points and thinking about how not only does a consumer, how they can interact with their consumer, but how does that impact with other competitors that are going to be in the market, within a year after them or 6 months, etc. And so they're really thinking about the bigger picture. There are some companies that don't think that. I think they're focusing so much financially, and they just need to make a move, and so they move, and then it blows up in their face, and then they end up having a lot of issues. I think Facebook is a really good example of that, where they've made a lot of mistakes recently, not only communications wise but also product wise. They've launched a ton of products that just don't take off because they're not well thought out, or they didn't have enough time and R&D, and they wanted to be the first to market.
So there's this balancing game going on then between wanting to have good brand equity, good brand affinity, good association with your brand versus the financial windfall that could come from being first to market, being the first one on the shelf, the proverbial shelf that people can get their hands on. And that reminds me of this book, one of the great marketing books called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And one of the laws, the first law is the law of firsts. And he talks about how a common theme throughout that book is that the marketing is mostly a battle of perception, not necessarily a battle of product or of quality of product. And so being first is one of the most important things that you can do, and having your message be that you were the first is one of the things that sticks with consumers the most. So we talked about also with Gen Z, though, that Gen Z is not very patient when it comes to a product that doesn't meet their expectations. So where then would a company, a brand balance wanting to be first, use that law of firsts versus off-putting their potential younger customers that could be very powerful to sustaining their brand. So in essence, does that law of first still apply with Gen Z?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's so funny because we have these conversations a lot with our clients, with Microsoft specifically. We've had this conversation with Coke as well. I think you're completely right. And there's a lot of headlines that even say that Gen Z no longer is brand loyal. So that whole concept of loyalty, which if a marketer is that's your shining beacon. That is the thing that you're trying to achieve for a brand 24/7. If you can create brand loyalty in a consumer base, like for example, like Apple, where the consumer base is just truly loyal to the brand as a whole and will constantly buy products, will constantly be part of that brand, then you're achieving success as a marketer. I mean, that's the gold standard. That's that all marketers are trying to achieve. I think the interesting part is that Gen Z, I think there's a lot of articles that say that Gen Z no longer is brand loyal. There's no such, that doesn't exist with Gen Z anymore. I think that's somewhat true, but also somewhat false. I think it's also a little bit of an overgeneralization. I think, yes, Gen Z can be loyal to some. Gen Z is very loyal to Apple. Gen Z is very loyal to Spotify and to a lot of other companies. I think the other interesting part of that too is that it's slightly off topic, but I think Gen Z, it's contradictory to as well, because Gen Z is also perceived as one of the generations that is the most socially like social forward or social, like most ethical, active, ethical, etc. Then you have companies like Spotify, or you have companies like Nike, for example. Nike has had and is not, well, they've certainly tried to cover it up, but they don't necessarily, at this point there's so much information about it. They have a ton of sweatshops that they use for their clothing. And Nike tries to just necessarily cover it up. Not necessarily, they don't deny it, but they also just try to cover up with a really nice advertising campaign with a really great celebrity and a really great key message. And it works. It works really well. Then there's still a ton of brand affinity, and Gen Z still buys into Nike. There's still a lot of brand love for that.
That's crazy.
It is.
I mean, it's so how one of the hallmarks of a generation being socially conscious, but still being able to either look the other way or have the veil pulled over them, where sweatshops are just covered up with, oh, look at Serena Williams. Right, exactly. You like Serena Williams, right? Exactly. And it's this huge cognitive dissonance for a lot of Gen Z. And then same thing for like Spotify, where there's been a lot of reports that Spotify doesn't pay their artists very well based on the money that's coming in and the percentages. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. I haven't really done a ton of research. I've just seen the articles about it, the headlines. I think the interesting point, though, to your question around Gen Z, I think brand loyalty still exists, but it is completely different brand loyalty than it was previously in other generations. And to your point about being first on market, I think it is less important than it was previously. I think
Gen Z specifically is looking at quality above everything else, and that Gen Z they will be loyal for sure to the brand. But it's more about it's loyalty earned. So they are looking for you to earn your respect, earn your loyalty, whether it's a fantastic product, high quality product, or it's you also making a big difference in the world. So I think that's the cognitive dissonance. If you can find that sweet spot where a company has an amazing product, but then they're also making a larger difference and not necessarily hurting the world or not necessarily hurting their environment, then Gen Z's 100% going to swarm to you.
Yeah, I can certainly relate from a Gen Z perspective. You know, me, I don't know, maybe I'll call myself Gen Z for the purposes of the conversation. When I hop around on a lot of different bits of software, just looking for something to be the most optimal part of my routine, of my tool set. You know, for one of the things is like a project management software. Like I'm always looking for something to better organize my day. You know, and I one of the last things that I was really bought into was this site called ClickUp. And ClickUp is just this great thing, combines a lot of different features from other different sites all together on one thing, and it's great, works great. The one thing though, and one of my friends who actually turned me on to ClickUp, he stopped using it because this one feature was not there, and the one feature that he wants is just a universal board for all of his stuff. Because you make a board for for this, for like he has a board for like he runs multiple clubs, so he has a different board for each club, and then a board for himself, like for his personal activities, his personal tasks, whatever. And ClickUp doesn't have one universal board. Okay, this is all of your tasks across all of your boards. Right. And so because of that, everything else is great. It works great, exactly how he wants it. But because of that, he just stops using it. He has stopped it. He has completely. And this guy was, he was on ClickUp. He was really like all for it. And but just using it a little bit over time. And realizing the kind of shortfalls in it, it's just completely. It's gone. And now he doesn't even use it anymore.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's so funny you mention that because it's a perfect example. We do, because we significantly talk about a lot of Gen Z as a whole with not only our clients, but we do a lot of conferences as well. We just did one with it's a professional group called Brand Innovators. So it's a invite only for brand managers and for C-suite in the marketing industry. So that includes everything from marketers, advertisers, and public relations. But this is only brand side professionals. So these are non-agencies or no agencies allowed in it. This is just on. It's a great way for them to network and to also talk about trends that are happening across the industry. This is both B2B and B2C, or business to consumer and business to business.
Another one of those great marketing terms.
Yes, exactly. Lots of jargon, so many acronyms, always. But this company, so we or this professional group, we just did a massive conference with them last year, and we talked about Gen Z. We were one of the keynote speakers around that. And one of the headlines we talked about is this concept around loyalty that is completely changing for Gen Z itself. And so one of the things that we focused on in terms of how we think that marketers should think about the future of loyalty is that it's earned. Loyalty is earned and it's continually tested. Gen Z is constantly testing their loyalty with other brands on a daily basis. So yes, there is loyalty that's there, but you need to keep that. You have to, not only do you have to earn it for the first time, but the brand itself, it's their responsibility to keep that loyalty going over and over again, which is hard for marketers because again, in the past, marketers where it was easy you got the loyalty of a consumer or customer base and you kept it for a very long time and that would even be within scandals, with crisis. Still, consumers at the time, for the past few decades, they'd still stick by that brand. They saw it as, it's a small hiccup. You get through it. It's kind of the same thing if you think about it with political candidates. Back in the day, there would be small scandals and consumers would still, and voters would still stick with that candidate. But that's changing a lot now. It's across society as a whole. I think Gen Z certainly is changing that, whether it's brand side and consumer focused and marketing, or it's political, or even a lot of other areas. Brand loyalty just isn't as. I think Gen Z is realizing that you need to earn it, that they have the power in terms of the consumer has the power. If you're here to ask something of us in terms of money or in terms of vote or etc., you need to prove that you deserve that vote, or that you need to, that needs to be, that you still own that vote, that you make sense, that you've earned that vote.
So I think brand loyalty speaks a lot to a more practical sensibility when it comes to purchase and making purchasing decisions. Like I know my parents are are not very they don't put much stock into brand scandals or what brands are doing. It's just it's a very practical mindset of, well, this product fits my needs and I'm just going to continue buying it. I don't. Well, I don't. Right. Why does it matter that like Colgate did what? I don't care. They clean my teeth well. Right. I'm not gonna right. So which is perfectly fine. And so we've seen a shift. Then we're speaking to a shift in people's relationships with brands, where there's a higher expectation for what brands should be doing, because in some sense, our purchasing decisions form a deeper part of consumers' identities than they ever did before. If you're buying from a specific brand, and that means that you are a specific person. That's part of you, part of your personality. And it's the internet has exacerbated that change, or maybe was even at the cause of that change, more than anything else. Is that a healthy place for a consumer to be with a brand, to be so close to a corporation who does have a bottom line to worry about? Is that healthy from a societal, an ethical, moral standpoint, however you want to take it? Is that a healthy place to be with, where they could do something that could just affect your practical life?
Right. That's really, really interesting. I think it goes to that point, and it's more of psychology than anything else, but I think a lot of consumers find safety from being able to identify themselves with brands or with individual products. I think the perfect example of that, and I think what embodies that concept the most, is probably car brands. Mm-hmm. So you tend to see personalities come alive, or perceptions and personas come alive with car brands specifically. Like if you saw someone driving down the street, usually you have a preconceived perception of what that person's like, their personality, just based on the car they're driving, which is so interesting to me. I think I've always thought that car brands are probably the most interesting concept for marketers, because you have such distinct persona groups per car brand, but then you also have very interesting perceptions where you have, like, in different geographies, that car brand can mean something completely different. So whether in the Pacific Northwest and you drive one specific brand, that perception is one way, but then the perception for the general audience of those that are that one consumer brand or that one car brand could be completely different in the South. Like it's geography related. It's also
I remember it used to be. I've heard like people talking about how like it used to be back in the day in Detroit. If you were ever caught driving a Japanese-made vehicle, then it would get destroyed.
Right.
People would throw rocks at it, completely screw up your vehicle, because that's right. It's part of Detroit. It's part of Detroit. Sure. The whole manufacturing culture there.
Right. I mean, you're going against Detroit if you were driving a Japanese car. You're going against society. You're going against your neighbor. You're actively going against their livelihood. It's the biggest market. At the time, was the biggest product that they had in Detroit itself. I think the interesting thing in the concept, though, I think it's back to that psychology term around like security. I think consumers use that as a way they try to associate themselves with specific brands or specific products to create that security around trying to find how do they see themselves within that product, or see themselves within society as a whole, or in the world as a whole. Especially as you get older, you realize that the world is big, and you start to lose yourself, I think, especially, granted, I'm only in my 20s, but I think from hearing from parents, from friends of friends that are much older, you go into a lot of like midlife crisis is a perfect example, and quarter life crisis, and all these different things. You do start to lose yourself as you get older, because you have so many different things around you, and the world almost becomes bigger as you get older. And as you start to increase in age, you start to see more possibilities, start to see more areas you can go down in your life, and you start to feel like you, on a sense, have more possibilities, but then you have less control of where those possibilities could go. So consumers, and a lot of times marketers, will then take advantage, or even manipulate, or even be malicious with that. They use that to their own advantage to try to create these personas that create security for consumers. And so you have major car brands that, for example, like the Subaru, which is very well known with Pacific Northwest. that car actually, that brand itself actually specifically started out with LGBTQ plus consumer groups back in the 70s when they first got started, but they never outwardly said that they saw there was a massive gap in the industry where there were no car brands specifically talking to LGBTQ groups at all. And at the time in the 70s, it still was, granted, like, it was, the sexual evolution. There was, sex was happening all the time in the 70s, but it wasn't like people were still like, yeah, gay rights. It was still was closeted. It was still very much so traditional society at the time. So Subaru saw that as an opportunity, I guess, in terms of, I'm sure they had a great analysis team, they had a great research team that saw that as an opportunity for a car brand to take hold of that persona group. So they specifically put in messaging and put in visuals within their advertising, within their marketing, that appealed to specifically lesbians. That was their main target demographic. Lesbians in the Pacific Northwest, in a very nature-oriented, off-road type-oriented car that was reliable and that you could use not only to go to the office, but you could also use it to go to the mountain and ski the next day. Mm-hmm. They were specifically focusing on how could they bring in that, and how could they focus on the environment without saying it outright? How could they really support that community, or even support's really the wrong word because they actually didn't really support it. They just used it as a marketing advantage and a product advantage, and then without saying it outright, without necessarily saying that they supported gay rights, or without saying that they supported that consumer group. And it worked really well, and that became it evolved eventually. It wasn't just that, it didn't stay that way, but now Subaru has become one of the most synonymous with reliable, with long-term longevity, that Subaru can stay with you for multiple generations. A lot of their marketing right now is focusing on generational, that you can literally pass your Subaru down to the next generation below you, and that it's not about finding the next, which is interesting too, though, because it's also that part of like cannibalism. Like, how do you, as a car brand, you're also insinuating that you don't have to buy another Subaru. Yeah. So like, you're telling that we're so reliable. Yeah, literally, we're so reliable. You don't have to buy another Subaru from us. Super interesting how that, like, I think that's, I'd love to be a fly in the wall thinking about that analysis and thinking about how they determined that key message. And I'm sure every marketing analyst in the room was like, please don't. No, like, we need to sell more cars. You're telling our consumer base, don't buy more cars from us. So it must be working because they're still using that key message after many years, and it's becoming core to their brand as a whole. So long story short, I think it is really interesting when consumers start to put themselves closer to brands. It can be a negative. It can create issues. I think the consumer base, though, it's always going to create more security than it is going to create insecurity with a lot of consumers. And so it's a mix between both marketers pushing that concept. They want to create personas. They want you to perceive their brand as part of your personality and describes you, because they can sell more money. They can sell more product. They can get more money. But I also think on the flip side, it does end up helping consumers. It helps them stay connected to reality, and it helps them feel more safe and secure in who they are as an individual. So I think it's going to stay for a long term. I think that's always going to be a big part of marketing as a whole, a big part of what consumers are looking for, and brands that do that really well are going to remain very profitable.
So without falling to the trap of giving too much free advertising, are there any brands that you're specifically loyal to that you've really bought into?
Yeah, it's funny. I typically don't think of myself as loyal. Usually, I for a long time have not. But now that I've gotten older, I'm like, oh shit, like maybe I am really loyal to things. Prime example is I've just now went from Samsung to iPhone. I really hate it. I hate the iPhone. I really hate it. And I was late on the bandwagon. I did it on purpose because I did not want to be part of. I didn't want to be everyone's on the iPhone, therefore I had to be on the iPhone. So of course I didn't do it for years and years and years, and then I had a perfect example too of Gen Z. I got annoyed because my Samsung stopped working. It was a whole issue. It was just not only the device, it was also the actual software. And I was like, all right, that's it. I'm over this. I was with Samsung for I had used a Samsung phone for almost 10 years, about 10 years. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm moving to iPhone. I can't handle this software issue is just driving me crazy. Moved to iPhone, and now I'm I absolutely hate it. This iPhone is a phone. I want a computer. I want a handheld computer. So I will go back to Samsung 100% next, which is crazy to think, but yeah. So I actually am loyal to Samsung. I think not as a brand, but as more as a product, which is interesting. I do like Samsung as a brand, not for phones per se, but like TV. I typically tend to go to Samsung for TVs. And then even thinking about like small things like washers and dryers, because I do see them as reliable for TVs and for tech. I'm like, oh, washer and dryer make, like, maybe they do make good washers and dryers. I'm still gonna do my research. I'm still gonna look at consumer reports. I'm still gonna look at all the different, metrics, etc. But yeah, Samsung's actually one of them. Spotify is actually one of them for sure. Again, dissonance as well from articles that I've seen, but it's easy to use, and it's a really interesting platform. It's just seamless across other devices as well. And then one of the others, actually Monday.com. When you were talking about ClickUp, we were looking at that for a company. I just also recently worked with Asana for another client. They use Asana internally, so then our team has to be on Asana as well. And it's so funny, Asana was first in the market. Asana was probably one of the first enterprise level, not the first, but one of the first, like really large enterprise level tech tools for project management and for like software design. They started out with a lot of like content production teams. So that's the project management for content or for creative. And then it led and got bigger from there. But the funny thing is, so Monday based a lot of their design based on Asana. It's very, very similar. But Monday is 10 times more intuitive. And it's also, to your point, like your friend was saying, I want one dashboard where everything's located in it. Monday allows you to do that because it's just like, it's kind of like a very large sandbox. You get to pick however you want to use it. But the interesting part is that it's like very difficult to start to understand how to use Monday because it is a big sandbox. Asana is easier to get started on. But it's just so funny now that like I've tested out multiple of these project management tools. At first I was like, Monday is Monday, like whatever. It's, it's a tool, great, wonderful. And now I'm like, oh my God, I really do love Monday. And I wish every clients were using it for their daily operations because it is so much easier. So yeah, it's just like these random, I used to not think I was loyal to a lot of brands. I think to that point though, I think I'm more loyal to the quality of the product than to the brand itself. I don't really care about the marketing. I don't really care about the individual, the perceptions around that brand. I'm still interested in the product. And if the product starts to lessen or if the quality goes down, I will look again. It's that concept of like continually testing my loyalty. I will look somewhere else if you're not meeting the table. It has to be going both ways. If I'm going to give you my money, you also have to stay with the times and you have to also be at that table. If you start to take your eye off the table and go somewhere else and start to look at another area and lose track of that quality, then I'm going to also look away as well and start to go somewhere else. Yeah,
I think when I think about what brands that I've been loyal to over my my long 20 years on this on this earth, I mean, video games immediately come to mind. Video game consoles, specifically, right? I mean, I was a PlayStation kid through and through, like all the way up till now, and part of it is. Well, after a while, you build up kind of like an ecosystem of games. So a lot of investment in one platform. I mean, you can't play PlayStation. The same game cannot be played on an Xbox, right? Or depending on the disc or the downloader or whatever, right? And I think it also does like kind of at this point kind of has to do with like an aesthetic thing because I thought about this when you brought up like the Samsung and like the Samsung. I thought about the branding, and I mean it is kind of satisfying to look at your fridge and see Samsung, and look at your washer and see Samsung, look at your TV and you see Samsung, look at your phone and you see Samsung. It all ties together. It scratches like the nice organizational itch that I have in my monkey brain. Exactly. And so like when I want to look at the entertainment center, I want to see a PlayStation like console, the PlayStation controller, the PlayStation camera, the PlayStation with the Sony TV, with the everything just kind of fits together. But loyalties, I mean, a little just a little tangent thing about the video game industry. I mean, there's a lot of people that are moving to Xbox now because specifically because like the supply constraints with the PlayStation and with the PS5. So that's another, if anybody is interested in just like looking at an industry that's always in flux. The video game industry is really cool to see like that. I myself, I mean, I'm probably going to stick with PlayStation, get a PlayStation 5 at some point. But I've also been tempted. I mean, I really like I did like the marketing that existed like during the PlayStation
Yeah.
4 generation, especially because they spoke to gamers and being game centric and game focused, whereas
Yeah.
Xbox always focused on being like entertainment from
Yeah.
the entertainment center as opposed to just simply about being games. But I
Yeah.
mean, the marketing now might, even the marketing itself, I mean, it's so powerful. Like the message for PlayStation kind of changed a little bit.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, okay, I don't know if, I mean, I still like your games, I still like your stuff, but
Yeah.
the messaging is kind of not vibing
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah.
So it's weird how we all.
Well, so have
Yeah.
you considered buying an Xbox then?
I have considered buying an Xbox because there's a one iteration of the newer generation that is like a cheaper model.
Yeah.
It's like $300.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a solid state, no discs or anything. Like you don't need a disc drive. No, or it doesn't accept discs, so it's just all digital, completely
Yeah.
digital.
Yeah.
And they have really cool products like Xbox Game Pass. It's like a
Yeah.
subscription service, so you can get a bunch of games on there. And so I have considered, and since it's more available now that you can basically find an Xbox Series
Yep.
S or X a lot more available, like almost
Yep.
on demand at this point.
Yep.
PlayStation 5, you're always like in queues and lines and bots buying them up still. So I've been tested in my loyalty, kind of like
Yeah.
the Xbox, man. Maybe I will.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny too because that was some of the work we did with Microsoft. I mean, we focused on gaming specifically. Xbox was we worked on several work streams with Microsoft. Xbox was one of them. Xbox Game Pass, and really focusing mostly on what's the correct word? Not desktop gaming, but like a computer gaming.
Yeah.
Yes, if you will. There's
PC gaming.
PC gaming. Thank you. That's it. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, PC gaming. We specifically focused on that and worked a lot through that. And the interesting part is Microsoft is taking a stance on quality. They are focusing heavily on quality. How can they make the experience the best? And then thinking about, okay, how do we talk about that marketing wise? But the quality is coming first within the conversation, which is super, super interesting to see. And I was excited to see that. I think that again, to that point, I think Gen Z is really focusing on quality, not only in terms of the experience itself, but even to your point around like, it's hard because you can't control like COVID, supply chain. That's literally impossible for brands.
Yeah.
And like I guarantee you there are thousands, if not multiple thousands of people right now, literally up all night, stressed about supply chain because their entire brand relies on it. So if they can't get their product out, they have to lay off massive teams. They might have to fold their business as a whole. Like, it's stressful, I'm sure. But I think that's the part that's really interesting is that unfortunately Gen Z is going to move on. They are so used to, there's another workaround, there's another solution. So it has to be seamless. It has to keep working. You have to find a way to get around it. And it's hard for brands. It is really hard. So I do have some kind of like pity and some like, self-love going out, like good luck to you all, especially to PlayStation. Sorry for all these hardships. I can only imagine the stress and level for these brand managers, but you got to find a solution and you got to find it fast.
Yeah, especially if you just take a lot of consumers of a video game console are parents.
Yes.
Yes. And if a parent buying a new generation console for their kid's birthday or Christmas, like this is like the big present of the year, maybe of the next 5 years. And then you go on Amazon or whatever and you see an Xbox is available,
right,
and PlayStation's not available, then the people who have the most brand loyalty are the gamers, the kids. They don't have really much brand loyalty at all. They're just gonna get what's there. And it's an unfortunate conversation as marketers we feel we feel from it is there are jobs on the line, and sometimes consumers forget about that as well. Like there are it's not just, it's easy to think about corporations, brands as these monolithic entities, but there are people whose livelihoods are on the line, like that it's made up of people, up of individuals who are just trying to do their part and trying to make their own living.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's super interesting too, though, and to your point about like purchasing power. So that's, I always get really excited for brands that are like, for example, you have a stakeholder group or persona that has the purchasing power, but then you have what we call influencer in the household that specifically is influencing the decision as a whole. Tends to happen with gaming is a great point of that. Tends to happen, of course, with a lot of like entry level products where the consumer, like the influencer is young, they don't have their own money, so it's usually like younger than 18 typically, or younger than really 25, where they're just entering kind of like their adulthood. They don't have the funds, their income to do it, so their parents are mostly flipping the bill to some extent. car brands is a perfect example of that. I think it's super interesting. I always get really excited when I have a problem like that, that a clients come to me where the purchasing power is actually with the parent or an older generation, and the real influencer, though, the decision maker, or a large part the influencer for the decision maker, is the younger generation that doesn't necessarily have the purchasing power. Those are the most interesting puzzles to try to figure out as a marketer. And I wanted to bring it up because it's just so, that's where I think I don't know, that's where the fun part happens, and it happens a lot.
Purchasing power, consumer efficacy,
Yes.
and then so much of that political efficacy.
Right.
That's a lot of, those are all, I share that with you. Really, really exciting topics, because you get into like the psychology of it, like
Right.
how empowered do you feel? Like how much of a we talked about on a previous episode of the podcast, like how empowered do you feel? How do you feel your decision
Right.
makes an effect on the greater world around you? How and it's important for to varying degrees in different levels of society. Like it's important for a voter to feel like their vote means something, because if they don't feel like their vote means something, then that's how you get very bad stuff, bad suggestions. That's how revolutions happen.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
if you have a consumer that doesn't feel like their purchasing power means anything, then then you get like economic upheaval and or people going up to different brands. So I mean, brands kind of do have to foster some sort of power, some sort of, they have to be able to be influenced by a consumer, whether or not that's an act.
Right.
That's another question. Like if because if a corporation is like playing pretend that your feedback means something, see, we're changing these, but it's just superficial changes, then that's even worse.
Right. Exactly. I think to that point too, I think Gen Z sees these like purchases and transactions as more relationship than previous generations, and I relationship in a very nimbus way. I think it's not that Gen Z is like purchasing from Xbox or PlayStation and thinking that like they have a specific say in how the company should move forward. But I think there is, to some extent, Gen Z sees this as, you have a responsibility to me. If you want my money, if you want to me to keep coming back to you, you have a responsibility to either continue with quality or continue with customer service, or there needs to be much more of a one-to-one relationship across the board. I think that's also interesting to see. We do quite a bit of work in the cosmetic industry and skincare industry with multiple clients. One of these, I can't remember the brand off the top of my head. It's a new brand that just entered the market. They just did a stakeholder meeting with all of their. So they're not public at all. They're a private company. They're very small. I think they're probably 15 or 20 employees, but they're starting to do really well. They did like a mock stakeholder conference, if you will. It was, I think, a 3 or 4 hour long conference where they wanted to talk about all the new products and talk about the company as a whole. They invited every single customer that has ever purchased from them, even like one time. If they had their email, they send a massive campaign out. God. And it did so well. And it's the most interesting thing. These are random, mostly Gen Z, random consumers though, that maybe have bought them from one time, who tuned into an online stakeholder conference. And first of all, no one goes to these conferences. Like Microsoft, Apple, huge brands, they do this all the time. Unless you're like a very large investor, a journalist, or just super interested in the brand, like you're either industry, etc. General consumers do not attend these. It's just, they're boring. They're usually long. They're 4 or 5 hours. No one has time in the day to look at that. And half the time they're just like, they are interesting. They try to make them interesting, but it's mostly about financial discussions or like different trends that are happening in the industry. It's very hyper focused for those that are in the industry itself. If you have a large cosmetic brand and skincare brand who somehow got general consumers who bought from them 1 time, 2 times to tune into some random stakeholder, like it was mind blowing to me. It was crazy to see the numbers, and they did so well from that. And they marketed it as, you are part of our company. The fact that you bought from us 1 time means that we have responsibility to you and you have responsibility to us. We're in this relationship. You are part of our company now. And it did so well with Gen Z, and they are continuing to grow at an exponential rate because of that. And I think the product's good. They have a lot of great things about that company. The product's good. It's sustainable products, but then also the marketing, the messaging is that we are in this together. That we are hand in hand with success. Our success means your success in terms of everyday life in general. so interesting to see, and I think that's going to be Gen Z striving for that. I think that's where a lot of companies are going to need to move down, and I really think that company is looking at the future of cosmetics and skincare.
So, Mark, as we begin to close this great episode out, do you have any closing comments, any thoughts that you had at some point that you wanted to say but didn't get a chance to say? Anything that you want to leave off the audience with as we put a bow on this conversation?
Yeah, no, I think the most interesting thing is that it's affecting Gen Z and these differences we talked about during the entire time here. It's affecting everything in our life. I think it's also affecting the industry as a whole significantly in terms of resourcing and entry level work itself. The fact that it's not only on the consumer side and how we think about marketing as a whole, but it's also marketing right now and communications is having a really rough time on hiring people and finding the best talent. It's like a talent war right now happening within our industry because it's a similar problem. Marketing has gone down for decades using marketing against our own industry, where they fortunately use a lot of the entry level team members to make a large part of their revenue margin. So you have massive teams working on these big brands that are, they're 1 or 2 years in the industry, and then the agency or the brand the agency or the consulting group, the firm is charging at a very large rate for those hours to the brand itself, to their client. So you have massive margins, and then those agencies are paying $30K a year in a massive city in New York and Chicago and Atlanta and LA. It's how do you live off that? And then the agency's making millions of dollars off that margin. It's super interesting to see. And there's been a huge trend shift now with COVID, where a lot of people in our industry quit and had started to leave the industry as a whole because of not only because of bad pay, but also bad hours. Our industries, you're always on, and that's part of it. You got to know that before going into it, and it's talked about quite extensively. You have to always be on in our industry because you have to be where the consumers are, and the consumers are always on as well.
They're everywhere.
Exactly. It's you just got to be on it. And but I think the interesting point though is that large gap in pay where we're trying to change that. I think at the agency we're trying to slowly nuance that and try to take a chunk off that issue if we can. And it's working. I mean, a lot of our team members, like I said, they're getting beyond entry level roles and getting higher pay rates because of it. But I think that we gotta, for our industry and for a lot of industries as well, you can't pay $30K in New York. I mean, how do you live off that? That's just absolutely insane. And I think a lot of our generation and Gen Z's finally saying enough is enough. We're not doing that. I'm not going to sacrifice my literally livelihood and food and rent, and I'm not going to live in a literal cardboard box and just have not the basic needs because I'm giving all my time and effort to a company that doesn't appreciate that, doesn't give the money or the effort to do so. And so I think it's interesting to see that change start to happen now, and it's hopefully going in the right direction, but we'll see how it goes.
So in short, know your worth.
Yes.
Go get yours.
Exactly.
Go get what you know.
Exactly.
Mark, are you active on social media? Do you want people to connect with you at all?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the only Mark Rottensteiner in the world. So my last name is very difficult.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's 13 characters long. It's all so much fun. But yeah, you can definitely find me. It's mark.rottensteiner is a lot of my handles. You could probably find me on the agency is probably the easiest place to find me first. Yeah. Because of my last name. And then you can kind of find me from there and all my links, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, all of that.
How do you spell Rottensteiner?
Yeah. Rottensteiner.
There we go.
It took me to 3rd grade to learn how to spell my own last name, so it was fun.
Oh, nice, Mark. Yep. Thank you. This has been a ride, man.
Yes.
Awesome. Oh, the train, it got knocked over. Oh, God.
Oh, no. I love the sound, though.
Oh, of course. And everybody at home, you can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, video version on YouTube, and video version on Spotify as well. You can see our lovely faces as you hear our words, if I do say so myself.
Oh, yes. Love it. I love it. It was fun.
Yeah, so remember, subscribe, give all the ratings, share if you want, and thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, see ya.
Thank you. See ya.